OpenAI is a fascinating company. One day they'll be introducing some crazy paradigm that changes what we use AI for, and then the next day some small company is trouncing them with the same technology. I fondly think back to the end of last year when O1 changed how models work entirely by introducing reasoning to the masses. This idea that a model can generate tokens to steer itself in the right direction and lead itself to a more likely correct answer. Just a few months later, not even, like a month and a half later, DeepSeek drops R1 with the same technique, but unlike OpenAI, they actually share those reasoning tokens because they shared an open weight model. You can use it for whatever. They got similar numbers to what OpenAI was getting in this thing you could use for free, and immediately the whole market collapsed as a result. This seemed like a one-off thing, this rare moment where a small company in China was able to copy, reproduce, and exceed the research OpenAI had done, but that continues to happen. And here we are today, right after GPT 5.2 dropped and Gemini 3 Pro is already ahead, and now Gemini 3 Flash is right behind. I was so blown away with the launch of GPT-5 that I was using it for as much as I could, which was admittedly not too much because it was so slow, but I still liked it a lot for code and UI stuff. And just a few months later, other models got better at UI and are still faster and more reliable, so I found myself using it less. And then there's everything from codecs to their web app to their image models and so much more. It seems like OpenAI is caught in this perpetual cycle where they do something incredible, get trumped, and now they're just second place for a long time. I want to talk more about this because I think it showcases how OpenAI is different from other companies, but also how tough it is to compete in this market as a whole. And alongside that, you might learn a bit about how I think about these models in labs and how I make decisions about what I am using. As always, none of the companies we're talking about now are paying me, and I am hopeful, fingers crossed, this isn't going to get me cut off of the nice list with OpenAI where I get early access to things. Either way, someone's got to pay us, so we'll do a quick break for today's sponsor. These guys are all about saving time, so if you're not hiring anybody, you can skip this ad. But if you are, you really should check out today's sponsor, because G2I will make hiring so much easier, so much faster, and probably bring you better engineers than you would otherwise get yourself. Their network of 8,000 engineers is unbelievable. They're not just a bunch of fresh grads trying to get their first gig. It's people who have had years upon years of experience doing real projects at real companies. And their knowledge is up to date too. The vast majority of them are already on board on the best AI tools, so you're not going to have to teach them how to use Cursor. You can just throw them at your code base and get them going. What's even crazier is how fast they'll start filing those PRs. It's G2I's goal to get you from signed up to PR filed within 7 days. Yes, really. You sign up day 1, you meet with their team day 2, they set up the Slack day 3, and they have candidates ready to start on a trial by the end of the week, and they will have PRs filed by the end of that day. It's kind of crazy, but I've seen it happen enough times, I do actually believe it. If you're running a team, you have way more important stuff to be doing than chasing down recruiters. Use the ones who get it at soydev.link/G2I. OpenAI can't get out of second place. I know this is a bold statement, but I want to try and break down the different categories of things we do with AI so I can more meaningfully establish this as obvious. There are things like programming, and I could break this down to front end versus back end and other things, but I'll keep it generic and just put programming as a category. I'll have chat experience for people using these models to get homework help, talk about their feelings, all the things that your average normie would do in ChatGPT. I'll throw in some other fun things like image generation. I don't know. What else do we got? Document analysis. Sure. Agent tool calling. Browser use. Can put in there. I'm not trying to say any of these categories are equal or that programming is as big of a deal as browser use and document analysis. I'm just trying to break down categories where having the best option means something. Being 1% better at translations for 5% more money doesn't mean anything. Everything's good enough at translating now. But yeah, I want to focus on a set of categories. Actually, deep research is an interesting one that I definitely will get to later. But for now, let's focus on these guys. We'll start with programming. I don't think this is too hot of a take at the moment, but in my opinion, the best programming model by far right now is Opus 4.5. I love shitting on Anthropic more than almost anyone does, but Opus is built different. I will say that for some really hard tasks that require a lot of thinking and understanding of your code base, GPT 5.2 X-High can do slightly better, but it ends up doing way more reasoning, way more tokens, taking forever because it's so slow, and still having the quirks of a GPT model versus an Opus one, where it just doesn't use the harness quite as well. It loves going rogue and doing strange shit, which is weird because GPT-5 was so good at instruction following before. I could put multiple other Anthropic and GPT models in here, but I'm really trying to think of this as the provider's positions in the list. And honestly, Gemini 3 Pro, this does not properly represent the gap I perceive between these things. I don't like coding with Gemini. There's a lot of reasons for it. It's a combination of the model just going rogue and doing its own shit, not handling tool calls very well. It's slightly better at UI than the other two, hypothetically sometimes. It's good at spatial reasoning. So if you're making a 3D game and want the model to place things for you, Gemini 3 Pro is solid. But actually using it for code on a day-to-day basis, not great. 5.2, I don't like using for traditional coding tasks, but if I'm planning a big overhaul or like want to make sure this bug is solved properly, I found 5.2 to be really nice for debugging type tasks. And then Opus as the general end all be all, just using it for everything all of the time. It's my default now. I use it all the time in Cursor. I've been shipping way more code as a result of how much fun I'm having with Opus. It's crazy how quickly this gap collapsed. GPT-5 was far ahead of everything else, so much so that we dealt with its quirks, we dealt with its slow speeds, we dealt with its weird tool call formatting. And now Opus is ahead again. It barely matters. They keep fighting to push it back, like the 5.1 and 5.2 drops both felt like attempts to swing back and take some of the win from Anthropic and Google. They succeeded in the case of Google, in my opinion. I also don't think that Gemini 3, it is very smart. The model knows a lot, but I don't think it's a great experience for actually using. So very quickly, GPT went from the best option with 5, which was still a crazy drop, and it collapsed quickly after. There's one other programming category I want to put down here just to continue leaning into this. I'll call this CLI tool. It was really cool to see OpenAI open sourcing Codex. I was genuinely hyped that a big lab took a thing as important as a CLI tool for doing agentic coding, and rather than hiding it behind closed doors and sharing a binary that they accidentally attach source maps to and then DMCA you for sharing, sorry, Anthropic, you're winning me over on the models. I do not like how you run Claude Code still. Codex coming out as true open source was huge, and I was genuinely really excited to see it. But they also rewrote it in Rust, which they did not need to do. I would argue that when Codex dropped, it was slightly ahead of Claude Code. It had roughly the same functionality, way more extensibility. The open source part meant you could do really cool shit with it. And at the time, Claude Code had somewhat stagnated due to the leads for the project going to Cursor and then quickly boomeranging back over to work at Claude Code. Since then, Codex has not meaningfully improved. If anything, it has degraded. And Claude Code has found its position pretty far ahead of it. I will go further, though. I will say OpenCode is also ahead of Codex. I will say Foundry and Droid are also ahead. I won't go as far as to say Gemini CLI is ahead, but it's not that far away. I'd put Codex at a comfortable 4th place, and then Gemini CLI in Forks. And this is because I just don't feel great when I use Codex. It doesn't have subagents or any concept of them yet. Its UI is weird. It really feels like they're putting too much time into porting to Rust and not enough time into making a competitive tool in the space. Speaking of which, people in chat are saying a lot of other tools that I've never seen anybody sincerely use, which is why they're not listed here because nobody's actually using them. Even Droid, I've had ups and downs with. We're working on a sponsor deal right now, so take that into account. When it works great, but actually onboarding to it sucked, and I'm working with the team to get that all fixed. Yeah, so they're not even in second place for the CLI tool. They came out with a really cool potential for first place and just immediately fell behind the competition and haven't done the right things to catch up, which has been sad to see. And now chat experience. This one's interesting because there's the model side and there is the actual user experience side. And if you rule out the only good chat app, which I understand why you would, it's unfair to the competition to talk about a thing that is so egregiously well-funded and built. Like, how could OpenAI, a multi-billion-dollar company, ever compete with 3 guys just hacking on this in San Francisco? It's unfair to OpenAI to put them against something this great. I get it. So let's put them against things that are a little closer to where they're at, you know, the Anthropics and the Googles of the world. So if we were to restrict chat experience to the user interface side and remove third parties that are doing better and really just focus on major labs, ChatGPT crushes there. This is one of their biggest edges. We'll talk more about it later. I would say Anthropic is right behind with Claude.ai. Not right behind. There's a pretty big gap. I almost want to indicate that. Big gap. And then we have Claude. And I would argue there's another pretty substantial gap before we get to Gemini, because the core Gemini chat experience is so bad. It's so bad. I don't want to make this video about that, but the one place OpenAI is definitely winning in the general major AI race is ChatGPT. That's still 70% of their revenue. It's still the majority of where people are hearing about OpenAI. When people refer to AI, they're often referring to ChatGPT. They crushed here, which allows them the leverage to not be number one in other places. This number one is the most important, and if they ever lose this, they die. Speaking of which, if either them or their competitors are interested in being the best chat app, I happen to know one that is a lot better than the others. Maybe we should chat. I want to go a little further on chat experience, though, similar to like what I just did, because the chat experience isn't just the actual UI that you're chatting in. It's not just the tools that the models have access to. It's also the chat model experience. And here's where I'm going to drop some hot takes. If you had asked me where I put these different models middle of the year, I probably would have put Anthropic in the lead. I have personally found Sonnet to be more pleasant to talk to than GPT models for a while now. And now with the new GPT models, I find that more so than ever. I am so tired of the emoji-riddled slop that we get out of GPT. I do not like asking GPT for anything to do with writing or feedback or just talking to it. It's not pleasant. And here's where I start to drop my actually hot takes. Since then, my feelings have changed. Kimi K2 is the best model to talk to. I have talked about this in a lot of other videos. I would implore you to just go to T3 Chat and try it. It's the free tier default model, and we did that change for a reason. It is a really, really pleasant model to use. I like it a lot. After this point, personally, I would say Sonnet is still nicer to talk with, and then I would say GPT-5. After that, I would say whatever the fuck Google's doing. I do not like talking to the Gemini models. They are not pleasant to interact with. They are great when you hand them a PDF and say, get me the useful data. They are shit when you ask them about your day. And personally, I'm not very racist, so I don't find Grok fun to talk to either. I'm happy you guys found that funny. Actually, you know what? To fight the bias accusations I always get, I'm going to do something stupid. The chat experience with Grok and XAI, not the models, I don't like those, but the actual apps for using them are far ahead of the competition. ChatGPT and Grok are the best apps for AI chat right now. They are the second and third best websites, first and second best apps. New app coming that will compete with them. Keep an eye out for that. We're hoping for a first beta of it soon. Fingers crossed, all goes well. But for now, they are the best mobile apps and also within the best web apps. Cool. And now we have image generation. Image generation is a weird one because for a very long time, Midjourney was so far ahead, it wasn't funny. Like Midjourney was the only usable image model for at least like 2 years. And I've been quietly using it for a bunch of random shit for as long as it's been available on Discord. That's the other crazy thing with Midjourney is it was only available via a Discord bot until earlier this year, if I recall. Kind of wild. Like I tried so hard to get early access to the web app. But man, they figured out everything from like instruction following to styles to in particular like realistic image generation way ahead of everybody else. But they're not a big lab. They don't have infinite funding like these other companies do. They just wanted a nice, tasteful image generation solution. And they also do a little bit of video now too, I think. I haven't kept up with them recently though, because they have been trounced by GPT Image 1. The GPT image model was the first image model that was good enough to start massive trends online. I'm sure we all remember that era where everybody was posting their giblified images, as well as the piss filter that they were all hit with so hard. I still think Sam Altman's Twitter profile pic is a giblified image. Yeah, it is. Like, yeah, that was a moment. And it still has the classic piss filter. Proud of him for sticking with it. That moment was crazy. And that moment was only possible because Image 1 from OpenAI was such a leap from things like DALL-E and even like Midjourney, where its ability to follow a style and honor the original image that's being edited was incredible. It was the first image model that did text well too, and they had a lot of crazy techniques to make that possible. It didn't have too many fingers. It didn't have a lot of the weird quirks other ones did, so much so that the thing we made fun of it for wasn't the images being inaccurate, it was the piss filter. They all looked yellow. That said, they got trumped. Nano Banana. How do you let something named Nano Banana beat you? Yeah, Google is Google. Nano Banana was the anonymous name they used when people were evaluating the model in things like Ella Marina when they first had a build of it working. Because the name was funny and caught on, they decided to stick with it instead of using the actual internal name, which I believe is Gemini Flash Image 2 or something. And since then, they've also introduced Nano Banana Pro, which is internally Gemini Flash Image Pro or something. But it's the branding that is stuck. They are now known as Nano Banana and Nano Banana Pro, respectively. Nano Banana was really, really good. GPT Image had a couple catches. In particular, it takes way too long to generate images. We're talking 2+ minutes sometimes. Sometimes it'll get as big as 5. It's crazy how long image 1 would take to generate things. Nano Banana flies. Nano Banana generates shit in seconds. It's hilarious how much faster it is. It wasn't quite as good at text, but it was good enough at it. And it did everything through the diffusion layer instead of GPT, which was handling a lot of tool calling and like other, what I believe are a canvas layer that they would use to add things to the image after the first pass. That was really promising. It allowed it to do things no one had seen before. And then Nano Banana just crushed it. Way faster, way cheaper, no piss filter, roughly same accuracy, good enough at text. Not quite as good, but good enough. But then Pro dropped and just shit all over everything else. Nano Banana Pro is still screwing with my head with all the things that can be done. I just had a friend vibe code a demo in 2 minutes where you hand it a Twitter profile, it scrapes for your biggest tweets of the month, and then generates a PowerPoint presentation by generating each slide with Nano Banana Pro. Because it doesn't just have like some text on your image a little bit like on your shirt or something proper. It can generate full slide decks. It can generate like marketing images and shit. It is unbelievable what level of like text and spatial awareness Nano Banana Pro has. It makes it capable of things that I didn't think ImageGen would ever be able to do. So much so that it's almost a little bit scary. Which is why OpenAI responded with GPT Image 1.5. Notice how I didn't move its position in the chart. 1.5 is up to 3 times faster than Image 1 was. It can handle text better. It can do some things resembling diagrams. And it does photorealism decently well if you add it to the prompt enough times. Otherwise, it defaults to this weird cartoony look. I was going to make a dedicated video on 1.5, but it doesn't seem like anybody cares. And honestly, I'm included in that. I'm not that excited about it. Nano Banana Pro is still so fresh that I want to exhaust its limitations before I go dive deeper to figure out what the limitations of 1.5 are. That said, it's still really slow, so it's not that fun to work with. And even if it was 10% better, it's also 3 to 5 times slower, so I don't find it as particularly useful for me at this time. Now we have the open weight chaos of everything else going on. And I would argue Midjourney is slightly below that simply because with the open weight models, you can do a lot of customization through things like LoRa's that lets you tune the behavior in specific directions. It's just the state of open weight image models is crazy right now. So yeah, I didn't put video in here because it's still so early. It's not a real use case. I guess Sora is slightly ahead of other things, but seeing what's cooking over at WAN with Alibaba, like WAN 2.6 is pretty nuts. It's hard to use those in a way where you can like really test their capabilities. So I'm not going to go deeper. I will say generally, OpenAI has a slight lead in video right now, but video barely matters. And the Chinese open weight labs are catching up really fast. So let's hop to document analysis. I'll move these out of the way more. Document analysis. I was just talking about this in my Gemini 3 Flash video. Gemini is so far ahead with this type of stuff, it's nuts. Gemini's ability to handle gigantic context, especially with Flash, it just chews through the shit. It can read a whole PDF. It can see the diagrams in it. It can get all the context out. It finds needles and haystacks really, really well. That said, GPT models are not bad at it either, especially the Nano model. I still think GPT-5 Nano is one of the most underrated models of recent times, and it was my favorite small model until 3 Flash just dropped, and now 3 Flash is crushing everything. If you remember my video about Tune, the alternative to JSON for making less token-heavy data sets for models, if you want to take a giant CSV or a giant JSON blob and hand it to a model and use less tokens, Tune makes it really easy to do that, and it sometimes increases the accuracy of lookups. Like we see here, Gemini 2.5 Flash gets an 87.6% lookup accuracy with Tune, and it gets an 82% with JSON. GPT-5 Nano gets a 91% with Tune and an 89% with standard JSON, and also the same 90.9% with JSON compacted. So yeah, pretty cool. And this is a Nano model. GPT-5 Nano is super small, super cheap, super fast, super nice. It's a great model. 2.5 Flash was close but slightly behind, and honestly, for the last few months, I would argue 5 Nano has held strong as a meaningful lead for giant context data retrieval in needles from haystacks type stuff. If you're curious how that compares to small models from other labs like Haiku from Anthropic, which is more expensive and slower and newer, it is a comical difference. It is over 4 times higher error rate. We're talking going from a 9% error rate to a 40% error rate. Gemini and OpenAI are just really far ahead with this stuff. And OpenAI has led it for a bit, but that's largely just because Google ships slower. Google doesn't drop models every few weeks like the other labs do. Now that Gemini 3 Flash is here, the gap is closed and GPT-5 Nano went from first to second place. That said, I would argue third place right now is GPT-OSS. So they have second and third here, which is cool. But first has been slaughtered by Gemini 3 Flash. Allegedly, Mistral has some cool stuff for this, in particular the OCR side. I'll believe it when somebody who's smarter than me tells me more. But right now, I just don't see many use cases for it. And I think Gemini 3 Flash and 5 Nano are still really far ahead for these use cases. And now, agents and tool calling. I could include instruction following here. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. This is how well do they use the tools they're given? How reliably do they follow the format for the tool calls? Do they know what tools to use and when? And for a long time, Anthropic was king here. They kind of invented the standard accidentally. They made tool calls go from this weird, vague concept to the way we use agents now. It's just, tool calling is essential to how we use AI now. Everything uses it. It's just the format that allows for agents to know more than their models were trained on. It's essential. And Anthropic killed it here, especially with 3.5 Sonnet. That was the start of agent and tool call runs, making a lot of sense for us to integrate. They maintained that lead for a while, but I would argue GPT-5 briefly gave the lead to OpenAI. A combination of the model being trained on it, as well as the new Harmony response format. If you're not familiar, OpenAI open sourced the method for response shaping so that other labs and other hosts in particular, people hosting the OpenAI open source models, would be able to understand this format for things like messages and tool calls, etc. This format is an open standard. It's mostly written in Rust for their parsing for it. It's really cool they open source this, and they've been as transparent as they have been around it. The introduction of Harmony made things a lot worse for GPT-OSS on drop because nobody had support for it yet. But as support slowly grew, it became a really strong point that made the OpenAI models and anything else able to follow Harmony a lot more reliable overall, which it was. And that's why for a long time, GPT-5 was the best tool calling model because it knew when to use the tools. It didn't overuse the tools. The formatting slowly got standardized enough that everything worked with it. And as long as you could deal with the wait times, it was a really good experience. And then Sonnet 4 dropped. And then Sonnet 4.1 dropped. And then 4.2. And then 4.5. And very quickly, GPT models stopped feeling like the best models for tools. They were still the smartest, and if you gave them a hard enough problem, you could see them shine. And then Opus dropped, and Opus 4.5 closed whatever gaps I perceived here still, and now GPT is comfortably in second place. And if you're wondering where does Gemini go here, not in a very good spot. I've had so many problems with Gemini models, malforming tools, not understanding which tools to use, overusing tools, calling the wrong things, calling CLI when it should be calling a search tool. Just being weird as Google stuff tends to be. You know that feeling when you go to a new page on a Google site, like a new product they released, and you hover over a button, a little scared to click because you don't quite know what it's actually going to do? That's how it feels using any of Google's models for anything. And Gemini is just not great for tool calling because you never know where it's going to go with those tools. Especially when you look at things like snitch bench, right? Benchmark for how aggressively models will snitch on you when given tools that allow them to do such. And you'll see that Gemini 2.5 Pro is by far the most aggressive snitch because it loves to use the tools you give it for all sorts of things, even if the things don't actually matter or benefit it. That's just the nature of the model. To be fair, there are other models that I would put before Gemini, but I don't want to just sit here and talk about the weird nuances across all the open weight models, the very small number of XAI models that are good enough at tool calling, or the craziness that is Composer 1 and the weird things that are happening over at Cursor to build models that are good specifically at this. Just take my word for it. Opus is by far the lead, and GPT 5.2 is smarter slightly, but so much slower and still can malformat tool calls that I just don't find it as useful. I don't get errors from Opus. I very occasionally get errors from GPT 5.2. 50% of the time I run Gemini and something like Cursor, I get weird errors for malformatted tool calls. And then we have browser use. And if I'm being honest, I don't actually keep up to date on what's going on here too much. I think it's an overrated use case. It is my understanding that Gemini 3 Pro is a meaningful lead here, in that OpenAI had a brief lead with GPT-5 that they have since lost to Opus 4.5. And then GPT is now in third. Apparently, even Gemini 3 Flash is really good at this now because it's so good at visual processing. But you get the idea. Across this random set of categories I picked for things that I know enough about to talk about that I think are interesting enough to be competitive, OpenAI is in second or worst in every category, mostly second place. In programming, it's number 2. In chat experiences, it's number 1, which is the edge they have to hold or they die. Images, they're number 2. Document analysis, they're number 2. Agent and tool calling stuff, they're number 2. And browser use, they're 2 or 3, depending on how you're measuring. This is where OpenAI currently is. But it is important to note that in every single one of these cases, the thing they initially released put them in number 1. And then quickly afterwards, they were pushed down to number 2 by some unexpected leap another lab made. But there's another way of looking at this. If we look at this instead, where we score first place is 3 points, second place is 2, and first place is 1, it gets very different. Let's do this scoring. So in programming, Opus is number 1. So 3, OpenAI 2, Google 1. Chat experience. Anthropic's so low, I don't even want to give them points, but I'll give them their 1 point. They get a 4 now because we add the 1. The 2 becomes a 5 because they're number 1. And Google keeps their 1 point. Image gen. Nano Banana is number 1. That puts them at 4. OpenAI gets 2 points. That puts them at 7. Anthropic doesn't get a score because they don't have any image models. Document analysis. Google is number 1. That puts them at 7 points. OpenAI is number 2. That puts them at 9 points. Anthropic is not even really on it. And if they were, they would be 1 point. I'll give them their 1 point. You can use it for that. I just wouldn't. Agentic and tool calling. Anthropic is obviously the lead, so they get 8. OpenAI is now at 11. And Google is going from 7 to 8 points. And then browser use, Gemini is number 1, so that puts them at 11. Opus is number 2, so that puts them at 10. And OpenAI is number 3, which puts them at 12. If we didn't include browser use, OpenAI would have been meaningfully in the lead, but since we did, they are still leading the other labs. And this is the point I really want to make. OpenAI isn't striving to be the best at almost any of these things. They are striving to make huge leaps in them actively. When they're making their image gen models, they're not looking at what Google's doing and saying, hey, how can we do that but 5% better? They're looking at the images they're generating and saying, how do we make the best possible images? How do we make this better? And then sometimes they have huge leaps, sometimes they don't. And the industry around them kind of just happens. Honestly, until like a few months ago, it didn't really feel like OpenAI paid any attention to what's going on outside of their own labs. That has shifted. It definitely seems like, especially after like the Code Red thing, they care a lot more about what's going on outside, but they still don't care that much. And the reason is simple: the chat experience. OpenAI's goal is not to crush every other lab at programming or document analysis. It is to be the default chat experience for most people using AI, so that I don't feel like I have to go somewhere else. They don't have to be as good at Opus at writing code. If they can get good enough and you already are on the $20 or $200 a month tier on OpenAI, you have less reason to go try in the first place. If they're 5% worse at coding, but you're already paying for it, who cares? Same with image gen. I guarantee you GPT image gets way more generations than Nano Banana does on a given day because people who use ChatGPT will use it. My own mom has generated images on ChatGPT. There's no world in which my mom is generating images on fucking Nano Banana. That's not happening. If I told her the name of that model, she would laugh and say, wait, you're not joking? OpenAI doesn't need to have the best image generation. They need to have good enough that people use it in ChatGPT and don't feel like they should go somewhere else for something better. Do you know what this really hits for? Document analysis. If my mom has a PDF she got from, I don't know, a receipt for something that they did to the house, and she wants to know if she's getting scammed or not, she can submit that on ChatGPT and say, hey, do these numbers look reasonable? And as long as the answer makes any sense at all, she's not going to go look for another model to do a slightly better job analyzing that document. She doesn't care. She wants a good enough answer. Do you see the theme that we're developing here? OpenAI's goal isn't to be the best, it's to be good enough that most people have no reason to ever leave ChatGPT.com. More and more over time, the role of all the things OpenAI develops is not trying to be the best in the world. That does sometimes happen as a consequence of the incredible amounts of research and effort they're putting into all the stuff they're doing, but they don't care because 70% of their revenue comes from ChatGPT subs. As long as you don't have reason to leave, they don't care. And the reason that whole code red thing happened is because they saw a 7% dip in their week-over-week traffic. That's all they care about. That's all that matters to them. They couldn't give less of a shit that Nano Banana renders text slightly more accurately than Image Gen 1.5 does, because people are going to generate way more images on ChatGPT anyways. They couldn't give less of a shit that Opus is slightly better at tool calling in the harness within something like Cursor, because GPT-5 and 5.2 can call tools totally fine within the ChatGPT harness. They care about how it feels to use the models in their harness on ChatGPT.com, and as long as they still have a good enough experience there where they feel within spitting distance of the competition, who cares? The risk comes if there's ever a big enough gap, like there was before GPT image dropped. DALL-E was shit. Every other image gen was comically better than DALL-E. So they put a lot of work in to catch up. They ended up leapfrogging everybody else, and now they're just kind of keeping pace with it. And this is also interesting because the only company that can compete meaningfully here is Google, because Google has insane distribution. They have apps people use every day. If they integrate their AI stuff properly, the incentive you have to go sign up for ChatGPT goes down a ton. And that's the way Google wins with their bundles. But Google's software surface area for AI stuff is so fucking shit that it barely matters. Gemini being fourth place here is a very important detail that fundamentally changes how Google and OpenAI respectively think about things. If, hypothetically speaking, the Gemini app went from utter shit to roughly as good as Grok, suddenly OpenAI has to be a lot more scared. But right now, the reality is that the average subscriber to something like Google Workspaces is more likely to use ChatGPT than they are to use Gemini. Like, think about it. How many people do you know that are paying for Google Workspaces that have a domain that isn't at google.com or at gmail.com? How many of them use Gemini every day on gemini.google.com? And how many of them are using OpenAI models through ChatGPT, through their editor of choice, through the phone app, through T3 Chatter, whatever else? I know pretty much everybody I talk to on a day-to-day basis, other than like my family, has a Google Workspaces plan that they're paying increasingly large amounts of money for every month, and none of them use Gemini. The moment that changes, Google's strategy here has to shift significantly, but at this point in time, they're the default. The same reason Google doesn't really give a fuck about Gmail and doesn't bother updating it meaningfully is the same reason Google's okay with being second place. It doesn't matter how much better or more private Proton Mail is, because every company's using fucking Google or using Outlook still, I guess. It doesn't matter that Nano Banana Pro is slightly better than GPT Image 1.5, because people are already using ChatGPT. They already won. And that's the interesting thing. OpenAI does not give a fuck about being second place as long as the gap isn't that big and they stay first in chat. The reason that OpenAI is okay with being in second place is because they already won first in the only category that matters, the app you open when you want to talk to an AI. And as long as they maintain that lead, they could fall to third, fourth, or even fifth place, because they're not in this for the small wins on benchmarks. They're in this to make the most money. And I would be very, very surprised if they stop making the absurd amounts of money they are. OpenAI is going to win, even if they stay second place. And that's a really weird thing to say, especially when I'm sitting here wearing my Google DeepMind shirt. But yeah, hopefully you get the idea. Hopefully this is a useful video. Thought it was an interesting rant. I'm curious how y'all feel. Let me know in the comments. And until next time, peace, nerds.